Welcome to an emergency pod episode of Walking the London Road. Never done one of these before, and just our luck that 12 hours after we finished recording all of our content for the end of 2025, Oxford United go and announce that Gary Rowett has been sacked because it has happened. Gary Rowett has been removed as Oxford United manager. It's something that, in truth, we all saw coming, and it's not entirely without reason. Obviously, we've talked about over the past couple of podcasts the run of form that Oxford United went on. We've talked at length about the style of play not being up to the standard that we expect at this football club. We said time and time again that as Oxford fans, we can hold our noses a bit if we're getting points, but the style has stopped getting points, and things are starting to get a lot louder within the fan base. So let's look at the statement released by Oxford United. As you can see here, it says Oxford United can confirm that Gary Rowett has departed his role as men's first team head coach. Assistant head coach Mark Sale has also left the club. As we mentioned, I think on the last podcast, on the podcast that you guys are yet to see at the time of talking, that, of course, Gary Rowett, it was almost a year from when Rowett was appointed to his final game, that being, of course, the 1-0 loss to Charlton. Grant Ferguson, of course, goes on to say, Gary joined during a challenging period and deserves immense credit for the hard work and leadership that saw us retain our championship status last season. However, following a disappointing run of results, we have had to make the difficult decision and in the best interest of the club. On behalf of the board, we would like to place on record our thanks to Gary and Mark for their contribution to the football club and wish them all the best in the future. Of course, the search for a new Oxford United manager has begun. Obviously, as these things do, the betting odds have already begun, and we'll get into that momentarily. But just a very quick overview of Gary's time as Oxford manager. As we spoke about kind of at the time and since, he came in at a very turbulent time. Obviously, Des Buckingham, club favourite, local boy, had just been sacked as Oxford manager. There was a lot of pressure on the football club. We were thinking, their first decision was not sacking Carl Robinson quick enough. Their second, sacking Des Buckingham too early. And obviously came in with experience. We went on a brilliant run of form, being unbeaten from in the league from when he was appointed to, I believe it was the 1st of February, I think it was, against Burnley. Obviously the one loss at Turf Moor, I can't remember if that was actually the 1st of February, but it was up until that Burnley game. We were unbeaten under Gary Rowett, and a very important run, because that run obviously gave us the majority of points we needed to stay in the division. Survived by a handful of points at the back end of last season, with some big wins at the end of the campaign against Sheffield United and Sunderland, of course, on the penultimate day, also picking up a draw against Cardiff, which pretty much secured our survival, and obviously drawing on the last day to Swansea in a bit of a party game. That's when things started to turn. I noted at the time, I believe on the podcast and with a couple of other people, that Gary Rowett's style of football is fantastic to end off a season, but not to start a campaign. And we saw that, obviously, the club has to take responsibility for the bungled nature of the Indonesia tour, no doubt about it. Obviously, players go out there where, Kieran Brown is still recovering from an injury. Ole Romane gets injured on that trip. A couple other players pick up knocks. We get some decent figure deals done for Brian de Keersmaker, for Brodie Spencer, most notably. But then at the end of January, that's when the spending of money really stops for Oxford United. It was then loan deals made up the majority of Oxford's remaining transfer business. Not entirely unexpected. We knew we would have one of the lower budgets in the division, but I'm not sure we expected it to be so low. To spend, what was it, commonly maybe £5.5 million at the very most on player acquisitions. At the same time, obviously, Charlton, newly promoted, spending almost 12 million quid. We know that Birmingham had spent an absolute metric crap ton. Wrexham also spending a lot of money. We knew that we had one of the smaller budgets. And like I say, the blame for the summer can't all go on Gary Rowett, Ed Waldron, Grant Ferguson, Tim Williams. The entire recruitment team does need to take some responsibility for the bungled nature of our transfer dealings. And also the players have to take responsibility for the fact that, we spoke multiple times through the course of this season so far that when the players step over that white line, Gary Rowett isn't responsible for their actions on the pitch. Thinking of recent games, Rowett isn't responsible for Jack Curry making a really silly handball in the penalty area. But when it comes to the style of play, they are enacting the manager's style. And we definitely saw that Rowett's pragmatism, it was, there were still some decent results in there, picking up draws against Middlesbrough and Millwall, obviously beating Ipswich under the lights, but against the sides around us, we're still severely lacking. The majority of our points still coming against sides in the upper echelon of the division, which of course means we are currently, at the time we're talking, 2 points inside the bottom three. A lot of games still to be played, obviously, but it is worth noting that Blackburn and Portsmouth play each other. They've obviously got a game in hand. So that's either going to be, still 2 points, maybe three if they draw, and that's going to make things a little bit more difficult. But this transfer win is massively important for Oxford United, and some very smart decisions need to be made. Tim Williams and Grant Ferguson have already spoken at length about the need for midfield reinforcements, for the fact that we're too top heavy. We've seen reports of a potential move back to Poland for Shemi Poheta. I've heard rumours since about mid-November of a couple of players being loaned out. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see. But obviously, the main thing we're talking about here is who will be the next Oxford United manager. Let's bring up the betting odds. And yeah, there's some interesting options. Michael Beale, obviously formerly of Sunderland and Rangers. There was a bit of discontent towards the back end of his time at Sunderland. Paddy McCarthy, who I believe is formerly a coach of Oliver Glasner's under at Crystal Palace. Liam Manning, Carl Robinson, obviously we know so well. We'll talk about those two at length in a minute. Matt Bloomfield makes up the remaining top five. Of course, formerly of Luton Town and Wickham. If you scroll down, you've got a bit more like Russell Martin, John Brady, Lee Grant, Michael Carrick, which, Gary Neal, we've spoken at length about how those two are definitely never going to happen. Darren Ferguson's interesting that Darren Ferguson is rated higher than Michael Skubala. I think I spoke about on the last podcast that for me, Michael Skubala is a very good League One manager, but I think his style of play would get ripped apart in the Championship. Darren Ferguson, I can't see the club appointing Darren Ferguson. Carrick and O'Neill, I've already said those are highly unlikely to happen. Russell Martin's an interesting one. Needs to rebuild his reputation in football after obviously a terrible spell at Southampton, an even worse spell at Rangers. So that would be interesting, though. Is Russell Martin the right person for this time of year? Not too sure of where we find ourselves. But let's focus on that top five. Matt Bloomfield, a former Luton and Wickham manager, I think his style of play is completely incompatible with this football club. And I think a lot of us would, consider it a cold day in hell if Matt Bloomfield was ever appointed as Oxford manager. Paddy McCarthy, I don't know too much about him, so we'll just skip over him. The main two I obviously want to talk about are Carl Robinson and Liam Manning. KR, obviously, manager for 5 years. Absolutely loved having him for the overwhelming majority of his time at our football club. He said a couple of times in recent interviews that he's, in the best place, personally at Salford. Would he swap Salford for Oxford? Probably, if given the opportunity. And I think the tension is very much mellowed with KR. How much it would cost, we don't know. It's likely he's on a significant amount of compensation would be required to get him out of Salford City. That's a tricky one. Liam Manning is obviously the one that a lot of people have been talking about, some jokingly, some more serially. For me, Liam Manning is an absolute no chance. I think I would be incredibly surprised if the hierarchy decided to bring Liam Manning back to the football club, given the way he left the football club. There were certain members of this squad that Liam Manning left high and dry midway through the 23-24 campaign. I'd be massively surprised if Liam Manning were to be reappointed as Oxford United manager. A couple of other options. Tony Mowbray is the one that I've thrown about in conversations already. A massively experienced manager, the only manager more experienced than Gary Rowett when it comes to Championship football. From what I've kind of read on Tony Mowbray's style, he puts a bit of a bit more emphasis on attacking football and youth development, which is obviously a very important thing at our football club. For me, I throw my money behind Tony Mowbray. But whether the board would go for another elder statesman, we'll have to wait and see. The other options, of course, would the club look at a manager outside of the UK? Obviously, the Indonesia link. It's entirely possible. The Eredivisie is where we've done a lot of our shopping for players recently. I wouldn't be surprised if we go and try and take a manager from the Eredivisie. I'm honestly not sure. The compensation is obviously a big factor to think about. Style of play. Would they want to come into a football club at this point? We talked about in the podcast we recorded last night about what this does to our transfer attractiveness to players in the window. Because I can tell you for a fact that if players have got an option and one of them is Oxford United and we're still in the relegation zone, it gets much more expensive both on wages and also transfer fees to bring them in. Like I say, my money will either throw behind Tony Mowbray, but you never know. It could be some we've never heard of. I mean, I'm dreading Patrick Kluivert, for example, because that seems like the kind of thing Eric Tohir would do, given he's just he was his first choice in the door. For the Indonesian national team, there's obviously been ex-players floated around, like John Terry's been floated around. A couple others that I'm blanking on at this moment. But I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if the club went down in that direction as well. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below of who you think should replace Gary Rowett as Oxford United manager. And also give us your thoughts on the on Rowett's time in the post, because I've seen a lot of non-Oxford fans talking about mad decision, all that kind of stuff. But we know our club best, don't we? We know that his style was incompatible with how we traditionally like to play football, and all that kind of stuff. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do a massive favour for us and like, comment and subscribe. Really helps out the channel in the algorithm. And we'll be back with another emergency podcast when Rowett's replacement is appointed. We'll see you soon.